Welcome to Pario Magazine, where I chat with individuals who have a desire to create. Today, I'm joined by professional wrestling journalist and podcaster. Welcome to Pario Magazine, Ella Jay.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Fantastic. Great to have you. So we're here today to chat about your journey through professional wrestling media. Before we dive into that, though, do you want to give our audience a little introduction as to who Ella is away from the crazy world of wrestling?
So honestly, wrestling consumes like we were talking off air. I honestly work 6-7 days a week. So it's about somewhere between 65 to 70 hours that wrestling is consumed. So outside of it, I'm honestly just trying to chill out, maybe watch some Netflix. I do enjoy reality TV. I watch a lot of YouTube. I enjoy going to concerts, but honestly, most of my days are wrestling based. There's always something going on, but I do try to separate myself when I can.
Yep. Try to watch anything non-wrestling related.
Yeah, like I honestly can't even listen to that many wrestling podcasts. There's only a select few that I will listen to other than like interviews, obviously. But most of the time I try to programming, not wrestling. Like I'll watch YouTube or movies on Netflix or reality TV. So I like to keep up with those to have some sanity outside of this bubble.
Yeah, I've seen that you're a big Survivor fan.
Yes. So Wednesday nights when it's Survivor season, which is coming up in March for me. I know it's typically AEW Dynamites for people, but Survivor, I've been a fan of Survivor about a year longer than I have with wrestling. For me, Wednesday nights are Survivor nights when it's in season time.
Did you watch the Australian season with
I know
Maddie?
Sandra was I know Maddie Wahlberg was on there, who's Grayson Waller, but also another Survivor two-time winner, Sandra Diaz Twine, was on there with her daughter on the Australian version of Survivor. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet, but I do know some from the American version have been on the Australian version as well.
Yep. Yeah, I thought Grayson was great on his
Yeah.
season, and good to see him doing some big things now, potentially next NXT
I
champion.
know. I obviously started watching the Aussie scene in 2019. And then so I saw him for about 2 years before he got signed and all of that, and got to see him wrestle with a bunch of the people. So it's really cool to see. And even Indy Hartwell, too. I found her just before she got signed to WWE. So it's cool to see people that I've seen for a bit do their stuff on the indies now, make a name for themselves in WWE.
Yep. Yeah, I'm coming over there soon, and I'm going to go check out some NXT shows. I'm excited to see him on this big grand stage now.
I know he's been doing amazing things ever since he turned heel. He's been really finding his vibe, and like the Grayson Waller effect has been taking place.
Yeah, that's definitely much more his groove and his personality, I think. So shifting back to you, I guess there are sort of two facets to your journey. Most importantly, which came first, the passion for wrestling or the passion for podcasting and writing?
Oh, I absolutely. Okay, so for writing, I've been a fan of writing into like my whole life. Like I used to write poetry, used to write like little short stories and stuff growing up. Always been a fan of writing, but that was more the creative writing. That was my minor in college, actually, was creative writing. I had no interest in podcasting until 2019, but I've always been like into creative writing and all of that. But definitely the love for professional wrestling came way before I even considered like podcasting. I went to college for a whole other different thing than what I'm doing now. So yeah, no, I've been a fan of wrestling. I found it in 2009, so it'll be 14 years this summer. And then I've been a fan, met so many amazing people through the wrestling Twitter community, which I know can be toxic sometimes, but there's a lot of people I've known for like 7-8 years now that are some of my best friends. We connected through wrestling. That definitely came long before I even knew that like wrestling media was even like a thing. I went to college for psychology and minored in creative writing. So I had a whole different career path planned out for me, but then I started podcasting as a hobby, and then it kind of just evolved from there into now like a full-time gig.
How was that transition from creative writing and podcasting as a hobby to then sort of, okay, maybe I should follow this as a potential career path?
Yeah, so for me, like I said, starting out, this literally just started out as a hobby. It just started with just my podcast alone, a Wrestling Gal podcast. I didn't come in with the intention of it being like an all women's wrestling thing. It was just going to be me talking about wrestling because I had been like a closeted wrestling fan like in real life, but I had always talked about it on Twitter and like online forums. So for me, that was another outlet to kind of express my love for it. But then it, like I said, evolved into like interviews and women's wrestling. And then I started getting more involved in other things. People knew me for my podcast, and then people started wanting to work with me about a year or two into me having my own podcast. And then it kind of just everything just happened in a domino effect. One site wanted to work with me, so I started working with SE Scoops. Then WrestleZone happened, Women's Wrestling Talk, Wrestling Inc., yada yada. The list go on and on. It kind of just happened all in a domino effect because I guess people saw the work I was doing in podcasting and then took notice and saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. And then I've been really fortunate enough that people have taken a chance on me. And now I got to configure my schedule in a way that I'm able to do this now full time and maintain like financial stability, which was a big struggle for me as I was trying to make this happen for like 1 or 2 years, trying to make it full time for a while, but it took a while, but we're here and I am so happy.
The joys of the media landscape. It's not
I know.
you're not going to become rich being a
No.
journalist or media personality.
No, especially, the beauty though about freelance is that you can make your own schedule. So like I said, I work for so many different outlets now that I had to configure my schedule in a way that was like, I had at least some breaks in there. But luckily, like I said, freelance allows you to work with whoever at basically the times you want, and all combined, it's been much more than I was ever making in retail, way more than that. But it's also what I love doing. So it's kind of just the best of both worlds.
Yep. And like you said, because it's something you love, you find yourself working all
Yeah.
the time, every day.
Yeah.
How did you find that transition from creative writing into the more journalistic style, which is a bit more cut and dry?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I did obviously, like I said, had the creative writing minor, so I took a bunch of those courses. But ironically enough, for my free electives, I found myself taking a lot of communication and journalism courses, which I should have taken the hint that I'm choosing these courses for me to take for my own free electives. I believe I took 3 or 4 communication classes and I took 2 journalism courses because I still liked writing. It was just obviously a little bit more factual, informative, but still maintaining like connections with people. So for me, I took a few courses in college in it. So I had a little bit of knowledge on it, but never like a formal, like background, a full degree in it. So I think it kind of stemmed from there. I had some background in it that I kind of knew a little bit about it, but I've been really fortunate. Like I said, I have a lot of people around me who have, 1, taken chances on me, but 2, been very, very helpful and educational and have guided me through this because I came into this knowing nothing. So it's been a lot of self-learning or seeking people out, asking people for help and learning as I go, basically. So that's basically how I went from creative writing, which I still love, into more like the journalism side. I've asked so many questions to so many people, so it's kind of learn as I go, but I've been really fortunate that I've been surrounded with so many people with good experience and great knowledge of the field already.
Okay, so even though you weren't intentionally going down that path, there was kind of always that draw there, just a little bit.
I think part of it is too because I had always envisioned myself in the psychology field. Like I literally was set to go to grad school for a thing called rehabilitation counseling, which is like counseling, obviously. So I always valued that human connection and like garnering those relationships. And a big part of that is the communication studies. So, and like, I took an interpersonal communication course. So I always loved that like human interaction. So I feel like that kind of perfectly transitioned over. Instead of, psychology, I'm talking to people, getting to know their stories. It's still kind of psychology, we're talking about how they're feeling and their mentality towards stuff. So I feel like it kind of correlates in a way. And it definitely gave me, I feel like, a huge advantage. And like, not saying that like I'm the best at it, but I feel like it definitely taught me to establish a rapport with somebody. And so I feel like it was kind of a natural transition to it. It's obviously a bit different. It's not like I'm not like diagnosing people or anything now, but it gave me a good basis for human understanding and like compassion and empathy. So I feel like everything just kind of blended well together. And maybe that's why I enjoy doing interviews the most now.
Yep.
So I feel like it just happened how it was going to happen.
And then especially with wrestling too, the psychology aspect is one of the biggest aspects of the art form.
Ironically, though, I don't even feel like I talk about the psychology aspect of wrestling a lot with people. We do talk wrestling, obviously, that's a big part of it, but I do also like to ask a lot of questions that are beyond wrestling or, you know, beyond just superficial in-ring stuff. Like, how are you feeling about this opponent? Obviously, some interviews, you know, are sanctioned like that. You have to promote it. Like, you have to ask, like, you have to ask a certain set of questions. But when I'm given the freedom to kind of like make my own story of how I want to structure this interview, I tend to dig kind of deeper into people's interests or maybe something that they don't talk about a lot. Sometimes it's not even wrestling related at all. It's just them as a person, their life philosophies. So it kind of intertwines two things that I love, which is like making that connection with people and pro wrestling. So I feel like it's been a good balance. And maybe that's why interviews are my favorite aspect of this. It make me feel like the most alive. So like I said, I just feel like it's worked out well.
And is that sort of what influenced you to start the A Wrestling Gal podcast in 2019? Just the idea of getting people's stories that they don't always get out there in the public?
So kind of like I alluded to at the beginning, I was not even intending to like do interviews a lot. When I first started out, it was more so just for me to give an outlet to express my love for professional wrestling because I had been such a closeted fan in real life. That like I said, these online forums and like Twitter and like the wrestling Twitter was like my outlet to connect with people who had that mutual interest. So for me, I'd been closeted for like a decade at that point, that I really wanted an outlet to express my love for it because I had a true passion for it. Like wrestling had taken over my life. Definitely sometimes when it shouldn't have, I've prioritized it over school and stuff. Sometimes don't do that, kids. But for me, like I said, it was more of starting out, it was more of an outlet just to express my love for this thing that I had been so closeted about, but I have so much knowledge about and so much passion for. But obviously when I first started interviewing, after the first couple interviews though, I was like, oh, I enjoy doing this. So like I said, it evolved from there. So I think I've had about 270 episodes, only about 5 of them are solo episodes. That and the first 4 were solo episodes. Since then, it's been almost exclusively interviews or multi-person shows with the exception of one. So it's definitely evolved. Only the first 4 episodes were what the original plan was, but then once I started doing more interviews and getting more reps, and I was like, oh, I like doing this. So then it just kind of went with the flow, how it was feeling.
Were you shocked at how quickly the interview side of it took off, or do you think it was purely because you enjoyed it so much, that's why they took off?
Can you define what you mean by taking off?
Like they got a bit more traction and people obviously gravitated to the podcast more once you started doing the interviews?
I feel like I'm more self-critical. For me, I don't consider myself of having to take off, but I feel like it definitely helped, not a launching pad, but it definitely helped mold what people know me for now, more of my niche, which is women's wrestling, which is why people like originally like an Essie Scoops and like a WrestleZone had approached me to do like women's wrestling stuff, whether it was a women's wrestling like show on their YouTube channel or to write a women's wrestling column. So for me, the interviews kind of evolved and helped mold my brand identity, my like what I'm known for in women's wrestling. So I think it's not so that they like took off, but the pattern definitely kept molding my identity and what people associate with me, or when people think of women's wrestling, I've had people tell me they associate that with me. So for me, that kind of started the domino effect of now I'm involved in a lot of women's wrestling things. I don't think that they've necessarily taken off like because it was me, but I don't know how to explain it. I'm just also self-critical and don't think I've really reached my full potential, not much like we're all our own worst critics, but I think they definitely helped like carve my brand identity in a sense.
Okay. So it's kind of serendipitous that the title of the podcast ended up working into that women's wrestling theme as well.
It did. It honestly, the original title, ironically, A Wrestling Gal was not the original title that I was going to go for. It's kind of funny. Originally, and I've only shared this one other time, originally I was going to call it like the Empower Wrestling Podcast.
Oh, wow.
And funnily enough, one of my good friends made an Empower in a pay-per-view called Empower a few years later. So it was just kind of like weird how weird things, like how things work out sometimes. It was originally going to be called like Empower. I think it was going to be called Empower Wrestling. But, you know, not everything in wrestling is empowering. You know, there's some sad stories in there. There's some challenges and stuff, you know. So I didn't want to like put myself into like a box that like it's always going to be positive, because wrestling isn't always positive. And so not a lot of the times, sometimes we do talk about deeper stuff on my podcast, some sad stuff or some terrible things that have happened, you know, but I feel like that's why I didn't gear towards the empower aspect of it, because not everything in wrestling or in life is positive, or empowering. As much as we would like it to be, the world is sometimes a scary and toxic place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially like this last week, we've gone through some of the really sad times in wrestling, which isn't the best. And in the 4 years since you created the podcast, you, like you said, put out about 270 episodes, which is pretty prolific in terms of a podcast. How did you manage to maintain such a frequent release and publishing schedule?
I would say this last year definitely has not been as frequent. Like, so I started in July of 2019. From July to that December was only 10 episodes. 2020, I had 95 episodes released. 2021, I believe it was 113. And then last year, I believe, was only like 52. So like it averages out to like once a week then. Obviously, though, during that time, you know, I took on more roles, which is why 2022 was not the best year for a wrestling gal. And ultimately now at this point, I just recently announced that I'm putting it on a hiatus. You know, people's careers have evolved, people's schedules have evolved. I feel like a wrestling gal is always a part of me. You know, it was the foundation of where I am and gave me a platform to showcase women's wrestling. But now through my freelance work, I also have other platforms where I'm able to lend a voice to women's wrestling through writing, through interviews, through news, videos. You know, I've been able to do that now on these other platforms too. So that's still a part of me. But unfortunately, like I said, I had to put a wrestling gal on hiatus. But during that time where I was active, especially 2020 and 2021, I honestly don't know how you know, that was, I feel like, the time where I was most ambitious, but that was also the time where that was kind of the only thing I had going on. All of 2020, that was all I had. 2021 was the year that I started working with other sites and still somehow managed it. So I feel like during those 2 years, that was basically the main thing I was doing, was my own podcast, to where I had the time to dedicate to that. So I feel like that's kind of is what led me to, I had so many episodes put out in just 1 year. So, but that was also, like I said, during the time where that was basically the only thing I was doing, you know, so I was putting all my time and love into that. And now I've gotten to spread that love for women's wrestling across other platforms. And unfortunately, you know, my own podcast has kind of gone on the back burner, but I want to make myself more well-rounded and branch out beyond podcasting. I feel like I've gotten a good feel for that in interviewing. So now I'm doing more things in like news and writing. And, you know, people's plans evolve. Like I said, this started out as a hobby and now it's turned into a career path. And I want to make myself more well-rounded.
Yep. And it is a hiatus. It's not like you're not shutting the podcast down. So people sort of don't worry about that.
So right now,
what are the plans?
Yeah, for like I said, it's going on a hiatus right now because I honestly don't know. I don't know the future of it. You know, I had so many hopes for it, but also, like I said, I have such an insane schedule right now. And granted, I took this on myself. You know, I am the one who made my schedule. And I feel like my, not intentions, but like my goals right now have kind of shifted a bit. where, like I said, I want to explore other avenues like writing. I'm starting a new news podcast with Joel Pearl, where it's twice a week we'll be covering news, and then we'll also be covering shows throughout the week, like recapping shows. And I haven't really done show recaps before. I've done some new shows in there I do with women's wrestling talk, but I want to get more of the feel and make myself more, like I said, more of an asset, more flexible and malleable to be able to do all these different things in wrestling. I just started commentating just over a year ago for Capital Championship Wrestling. That's also something that I've been trying to get better at. So yeah, right now it's just on a hiatus. I honestly don't know when it's going to come back, but like I said, a lot of the girls that I have interviewed for a wrestling gal, I've interviewed again in recent months for WrestleZone. So I also have it's kind of similar where I have the women's wrestling wrap up column for WrestleZone, which is also accompanied with an interview most weeks with a lot of the indie girls that I would have been interviewing anyways for a wrestling gal. So it's kind of the same thing, just on a different platform.
Still getting a similar
right
satisfaction.
Yeah,
from it.
I'm still chatting with the girls. The indie girls have a special place in my heart, and I've been fortunate enough that WrestleZone is allowing me to interview them, put it in the column, put it up with companion articles on a bigger platform than my own podcast could ever even dream about reaching. So it's kind of the same thing, just on a different platform right now,
Yep. And then how did you sort of go about sourcing those interviews? And in the beginning, was that a difficult process, sort of starting out from essentially no base?
Do you mean like research wise, or like just getting them scheduled?
Yeah, like just getting those people involved and sort of, hey,
Yes.
here's a brand new podcast.
Yeah.
Do you want to come on?
So originally when I was starting out, I knew that I had to start out with people that I was already familiar with, that people I already knew. So my first interview was technically with my good friend Samira on my first podcast episode. Half of the episode was Evolution. The other was an interview with her. I'd been friends with her, since 2014. So, and she does her own channel. She does interviews. She does a lot of media stuff. We had been good friends. So I started out with people I knew. I was good friends with ROH Women's Champion at the time, Kelly Klein. She was my first wrestler I ever interviewed. Then after that was Alicia Toot, who I'd built a good rapport with long before I was even in this media space. So I started out with people that knew me already. And then after that, ironically, after I kind of exhausted the people I knew, I turned to sometimes you just got to shoot your shots with people you want to interview. And Kingsley and Xena were actually the ones right after the ones that I'd gone through the people I already knew. I'd reached out to Kingsley and Xena. They were kind of the first pair of people that didn't really know me. Obviously, I'm good friends with Kingsley now. We've built a great rapport since then. I saw her in Dallas last year. It was a fun time. But the rest of the time was honestly just building a good rapport with people on social media, building my name, sending out an email. You never know who's going to respond. You might have to send out 10 of them, but even if you just get one, that's a good thing, So I've learned that sometimes you just got to shoot your shot, and with each thing, it builds your resume and your credibility. So I'm thankful that people that maybe didn't know me took a chance on me. But again, you sometimes just have to take that chance after you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone, which I did pretty quickly after my first 3 interviews. The next however many were with people who didn't know me really well, or people we had built on a little bit of a rapport with online, which is something I just enjoy doing anyways. You can connect with people long before you even reach out for like an interview or something. So I think that's something that I've learned, is to build a rapport first a lot of the time. And then reach out, then they're, I feel like, more prone to say yes.
Yep. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean about just throwing it out there with the Will Ospreay interview. I just send an email out.
Sometimes you literally never know. I know.
Like I was expecting maybe someone lower on the card in New Japan, and they came back and said, "Oh, do you want to talk to Will?" I was like, "Whoa, okay, yes."
Yeah. You never know. Honestly, I've gotten some that I thought that I would never get, or ones that I'd been working for like a year or two that I finally got. And sometimes persistency is key.
And how do you feel your skills as a podcaster and a writer have grown over the years?
Interviewer wise, I feel like I've gotten a little bit more confident in it. My approach is pretty still the same. You know, I have all my questions written on the side, like written out and structured, but I definitely used to be really, really structured. Whereas now sometimes you just got to go with the flow of a conversation and not force it. And like sometimes spontaneous people shock you with some of the things you say, or it intrigues you. So you want to ask a follow-up. So not limiting myself to just what's written on my notes, has been an approach. And I mean, I've had people who I look up to, like a Denise Salcedo. The second time I interviewed her, like I didn't even ask her. She just told me that like we had chatted a year apart, and she told me that like even in just a year, she saw that I was so much more confident, and that had obviously improved in my interviewing skills and just the confidence level. So I think I've just gotten more confident. I don't think my approach has changed too much. I feel like I typically, like I said, unless it's like a certain sanctioned thing where you can't ask certain questions, but again, that most interviews aren't like that, where you have to only ask this or whatever. You can only ask certain things. For the ones where I have more freedom, I feel like I like to like have deeper questions, unless it's I've been somebody's first interview like over a dozen times. And even then though, there's still resources out there. So for me, I think it's just 95% of the time, staying away from the cliche questions. Only once or twice, I believe I was somebody's first interview. Plus there was barely anything out there about them, not on their social media. There was no past interviews. And only then will I resort to more of the cliche wrestling questions. But even then you can bring in some more icebreaker personal questions that aren't wrestling related. So for me, I try to make things more personal, exciting, deep, interesting with my questions. So for me, I think I've just gotten more confident. And then writing wise, I feel like it's different because every site I work for has a different like formula or layout or expectations. So at least in the recent months, it's honestly just been conforming to, I need to what's it called, separate with this site. You have to write this certain style, this certain way, they have this certain system. It's just separating all of them and kind of cognizantly remembering which is which. So I would say I'm still learning. I've only been full-time writing since October. I was writing for I've been writing for WrestleZone since like regularly since late May of 2021. But still, like I said, it hasn't even been 2 years. I've only been writing full-time for really only 3 months now. Whereas before, it would be like couple days a week, maybe only once or twice a week. So I feel like I'm still learning. I still feel like I'm not reaching my full potential in it yet, but also that comes with time, much like it took me like 3 years to even get comfortable with like interviewing and feeling confident in like my abilities, So I feel like right now, I don't know. I feel like I need to have more time and get more reps in for writing wise anyway.
And with that jump to being a full-time media personality, was there a singular opportunity that came up, or was it just a culmination of a bunch of little things that made it, okay, now it's an obvious time to jump?
No. So for me, obviously all of them combined, is what really sold me. But the major factor was obviously I was working we call it a shoot job, a day job, whatever you want to call it, in retail, while I was still, writing occasional. I would literally have to I could only go week to week because in retail, I only got my schedule a week out in advance. So then I would have to rush and say, oh, I'm available to write these days, So I just got tired of going only week to week, and I was like, I just want to do this full time so badly. I'm so tired. I'm not able to schedule interviews more than a week out in advance. And even if I request like a certain day off, it's not guaranteed. So for me, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I was just going insane, to be honest. And plus, but also, I also had to make sure I was financially stable, And so for me, it was consistency and financial stability that I needed to feel secure in before I was going to make that jump. And so it was late August, I had been randomly searching Indeed for wrestling jobs, right? So I type in wrestling. Wrestling Inc. was hiring writers. And I was like, Oh, I have writing experience. I've been writing for WrestleZone and SC Scoops for a bit. So I had a thing in PWI that I was able to. So I redid my whole resume, sent in my writing samples, all of that, and sent it out. And then come to find out, they were actually looking at my social media, looking at recruiting me anyways for the writing position. So it just so happened to work out like that. And, you know, everything combined, I was lucky enough. Freelance work lets you make basically your own schedule. So I was able to make my own schedule on what day is which most days it's actually a mix of both, where I'll have double duty with one site in the morning and the other in the evening. So Wrestling Inc. was definitely the catalyst to it. It was kind of taking the place of my shoot job, and it was kind of giving me that anchor that I needed to feel confident enough that I was going to be financially stable with it and consistency. So for me, then after that, I got to base it around, I'm going to work for this job this time and all that. So for me, it was definitely Wrestling Inc. was the catalyst, because everything combined made me feel confident that I could survive financially, as we all want to do, but also it was consistency. Whereas I know what my schedule, at least my writing schedule, is going to be. That's going to be the same every week unless I'm traveling. And then I can finally base my interviews around that. I can actually schedule in advance. I know what my writing schedule is going to be. It's awesome. So
much less stress.
Yes, it's consistent, and I can actually schedule things weeks out in advance now, because I know what my writing schedule is going to be. And my writing schedule is about 75% of my weekly income and like time. So,
and then in terms of like your top tips for people looking to maybe go into the wrestling media field, would you say it is that, yeah, just branch out and contact as many people as possible and really just start on maybe like a blog yourself or your own podcast, just to get those reps in and get a bit more confident before you go for that full-time job?
I feel like one thing that was taught to me is you have to walk before you can run. You know, you can reach out to so and so many people, but you also can't have the expectation that, say you reach out to 10 people, that all 10 people are going to get back to you. You know, it takes time to build up your resume and build up your rapport. So I would say start out with people that you're familiar with, like I did, whether you're friends with them or people know you on social media. Build a rapport on social media. I can't tell you how many times that I have just interacted with people on Twitter, liked their stuff, made a nice comment, and we just naturally like kicked off. And then later on down the road, when I reached out for an interview, they were like, oh yeah, like let's do it, you know? So it's just being nice, but also don't over push your boundaries. You know, there's a line, just don't cross that. But definitely walk. You can't run until you can walk. You have to walk before you can run. So don't expect, you know, even I'm still self-critical. Even I still am not satisfied with how certain things went, but that was on me because I also set way higher expectations than I could basically physically achieve. And that was ultimately kind of one of my own downfalls in my own work. That also kind of led me to put my own podcast on a hiatus. So don't be like me. You be reasonable, you know, be ambitious, but don't be over eager, you know, don't have high expectations starting out, because everybody is, unless you're like The Rock or something, if The Rock were to start his own podcast, he already has a following, you know. Yep. You're going to have to work your way up and build genuine connections with people, because honestly, you never know who or what could lead you to where it. They say it's not about who you know, but networking is a big part of this, and is definitely a big part as to what's led me to my success. I wouldn't say success, but led me to getting to a place where I actually feel like somewhat achieved.
Yeah. I think a lot of people forget that the social media.
Yeah.
Just being nice to people can actually be really helpful.
Yeah.
And then looking ahead, what is the ultimate dream with your career as a wrestling journalist? Would you perhaps like to one day bring back a wrestling girl and expand it into like a podcast and website that is all yours with your own little team?
You know what's funny is I don't really consider myself a journalist, although I do a lot of things in that journalism realm. You know, I consider myself more of a media personality. But for me, honestly, I reached the big goal that I had, which was full time, you know. So I've just been kind of going along with the flow right now. You know, I don't know. I think just right now, like I said, I achieved the goal that I had for like 2 years. And so I think for right now, like I said, I just want to expand my repertoire and make myself at least be open to more aspects of professional wrestling. Like I said, I started doing commentary just over a year ago. I'm still learning that, you know, I'm getting more into writing. I'm now starting to do show recaps, which I haven't really done before, really. I've been doing more news shows, you know, there's so many facets of professional wrestling beyond an in-ring performer that I've been trying to at least dip my toe into and be open to, and just wanted to make myself more well-rounded. If I don't like it, you know, some things just don't work out, but I'm trying to be more open-minded to things and make myself more well-rounded. And, you know, I don't really have a set goal right now. It's just kind of going with the flow and seeing what I enjoy. I know I enjoy interviewing right now. For me right now, if I could pick just one thing, it would just be to be, you know, I would, you know, Ryan Satin has his own show with WWE Out of Character. Like that right now would be like a dream if I could like interview people and make good money from it. But honestly, that's just not realistic right now. You know, it's hard to do just to make your basic living off of just interviewing people. So in the meantime, I'm just trying to, like I said, make myself more well-rounded and more versatile in this. Because who knows, maybe I'll find something else that I enjoy just as much as interviewing.
Okay. So finally, where is the best place for people to support you and track your creative journey moving forward?
So the easiest place to follow me is where I'm most active, which is on Twitter. I've tried to be active on Instagram. It's just, you know, that's more of a personal page for me. But the easiest way and where I'm most active is definitely Twitter at It's Ella Jay. If you go to the link in my bio, I believe it's the milkshake app. Now you can actually thank Katie, good old Katie from Australia, who put me onto that app. All of my links there to my projects and podcasts and writing is all there in one convenient place. I still have to update some things, but most of the stuff is there right now. And like I said, I'm most active on Twitter for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time, and good luck with everything.
Thank you so much for having me, Jamie. This was a lot of fun.